All right, I'm going to go ahead and start. Welcome to Intro to Photoshop, brought to you by the Digital Learning Lab. Today, I'm just going to go over the basics of Photoshop, some video editing. No, not video editing, photo editing. If you can't tell, it's my first time doing a stream, so bear with me, as I probably make a whole bunch of mistakes. But afterwards, the VOD will be available, so if you need a refresher or to look over anything we discussed today, you can go through there and grab that. All right, so Photoshop. Everybody's heard of it, I'm sure. It's almost synonymous with editing photos these days. So just a real quick basic of what Photoshop is. Photoshop is a raster image graphics editor published by Adobe. So within the technology field, we call images kind of like raster because there's two different forms of images. There's raster and there's vector, which that's a little more advanced, but we'll probably go over that when we get into the actual program. So Photoshop is kind of a jack of all trades. You can do photo manipulation, you can do digital art, and you can create graphics for websites within Photoshop. And the program itself is subscription-based, which is a little steep, which is why, though you might hear so much about Photoshop, you don't really see a lot of people using it very casually. So in that vein, I'm just going to throw out some quick Photoshop alternatives, just like so you know that photo manipulation and digital art is available for anybody without the subscription. But just before that, Adobe Suite is available on all the campus computers, and we have it on the iMacs within Kettner School Business, if you've been there before. And at the Digital Learning Lab itself, we have gaming laptops available for rent. Those have the entire Adobe Suite on them. So if you ever have a project you want to do, you can just come to the lab, rent out a laptop, and you'll be good to go. So some alternatives for photo manipulation. In the Adobe family, there's Adobe Lightroom. This program is specifically for editing photos, so it's a lot more in-depth, a lot more useful. And if you have access to the Adobe Suite and you only want to manipulate photos, I'd recommend Lightroom. For free, there's the program called GIMP. This is basically the run-of-the-mill Photoshop replacement if you don't have the money to grab Photoshop. It's a very useful tool. You can get lots of mileage out of it. And then Affinity Photo is another recommended photo manipulation software. And if you're interested in Photoshop for digital art, there's programs such as Clip Studio Paint, Procreate for the iPad, and Krita, which is free. So why is Photoshop just so unanimous with photo editing? It's industry standard. So in professional fields, Photoshop is what you'll see. And it's so common these days because it was released in 1987 on the Macintosh. So it's been around for a long time. A lot of people have been exposed to it. Now, the thing with Photoshop is, as I mentioned before, it's a jack of all trades, but that means master of none. So really these days, you can find programs for whatever you want for your specific purposes, and it will probably perform better than Photoshop, and it might be a bit more user intuitive too. I'm sure you guys have heard of Canva, which is what's used for a lot of like poster and event making. That's kind of like a general like multi-use. This is for kind of like the less intense sort of thing. So that's kind of the example of how lots of alternatives to Photoshop have popped up, but Photoshop still has that place in the industry just because it's been around for a long time and its ability to be flexible and multi-purpose. Photoshop has some iconic tools that most people associate with it off the top of their head. The spot healing brush, which removes blemishes within photos. Maybe you want to get rid of like a cloud in the sky or something that's popping out of somebody's head. You can use the spot healing brush to do that. The cloning stamp is also popular. You can take a selected part of the image, you can clone it, and then you can drag it across so you can duplicate items. And then for your more digital art side, there's built-in brushes. You can also download a whole bunch of user-made brushes that will help you with your art. That's it for the intro. I'm going to go ahead and swap over to the Photoshop program itself. There we go. All right, so when you open Photoshop, this is a screen that you'll see. Whenever you want to start with a new project, you go up here to New File. Let's go ahead and make one. Whenever you click Create New File, you'll run across this screen. This allows you to set the settings for, oh, I guess that's not appearing. Streams are odd. Anyway, a little pop-up screen will appear. It has different canvas sizes. You'll want to choose the default Photoshop size or any that fits with your photo that you want to edit. So I'm just going to go ahead and create that. So this is what will appear. You'll have your canvas, and for some reason it's not showing my tools on the side, which is very unfortunate. All right, I'm gonna have to troubleshoot that real quick. Apologies for the
You'll have to share the entire instead of the application.
All right, apologies for that first time sharing, as I mentioned. So you actually should be able to see the little pop-up that comes up. Hopefully. Yeah, there we go. All right, so this is what I was talking about before. When you create a new file, you'll see this new document page. It'll give you some preset sizes, and you'll see over here that you can manually enter your sizes. The most important thing over here that I want to mention is resolution. This is also known as DPI. This is really important if you want to print something that you create in Photoshop. So printers operate dots per inch. This is what that relates to. For printing, at minimum, you want to use a resolution of 350. Any lower than that, your printed image will not look great. It'll look very blurry, and it doesn't really matter when you're working digitally. So if you want to post an image or something, you don't really have to worry about this. But I'm just going to go ahead and put that as 350, just so we can have that for the printing. I'm going to go ahead and create this. So here you can see the canvas. This is just, it's a little intimidating when you're first coming into it. It's got like all these logos on the side. It's got all this. Really, what you just want to do is focus on the side tools. You can see that they have little built-in tutorials whenever you first start Photoshop. So if you're curious and need a refresher about your tools, you can always check that. So what I'm going to do is import an image of Catawba so we can start working on that. I will throw that into the chat real quick. You might see just like infinite screens or whatever. Or I have a computer next to me. I can pull it from there. So where you want to go, this is just from the Catawba College Wikipedia page. This image. We'll open that in a new tab. To pull an image into Photoshop, you drag it from there, just plop it right in, which should work, but it is denying me apparently. Alternatively, if you run into that issue as I just did, you can always save image as, I'll just name this Catawba College photo, and save that. When you want to enter an image, you go to File, and you go to Place Embedded. You can browse your files on your computer. I'll go to my downloads, and I'll enter Catawba College photo. There we go. All right. So as you can see, it kind of doesn't really fit the canvas. We've got these white spaces on the edges. We'll fix that momentarily. For now, I'm going to display this. This is the Move tool. You can move your image across the canvas wherever you feel like. This will let you just get a better workflow. To resize our canvas to our image, we're going to skip down here to the Crop tool. This will change the size of our canvas, and it should lock to the image itself. So to get our desired size, we just crop down and press enter. Now, we don't have the annoying white sides of the canvas, and we can just work directly on our photo. So just to run through some tools real quick. This is the Marquee tool, also known as the Selection tool. You drag this creates a selection, and you can work within the selection, you can like cut it out, all that sort of thing. I'll be using some hotkeys too. The one you really want to know for working in Photoshop is Control-Z. Control-Z undoes what you have done. So if you make a mistake when editing an image, you can just Control-Z and you're back to your square one. I would like to take this opportunity to mention that if you're working on a personal photo, you always want to work on a copy. So when you have your image file, you'll want to take that. You'll want to create a duplicate within the files itself and then name it like photocopy or something. So that way, if you're working on a photo in Photoshop, you make a couple of mistakes, you accidentally save, you're not going to save over your original photo. You'll be able to keep it, you can make another duplicate and work on it again. So back to the tools. Lasso tool is also a selection tool. This isn't the clean cut boxes like the Marquee tool. You can draw specific shapes that you'd like to select. If you right click, you can also see that tools have different versions. Each of these tools has a different purpose, but for the most part, the default tools that are on the edge are going to serve you well. Object Selection tool is another good thing of Photoshop. This will automatically select objects that it detects. So I clicked, and this selected the admin building out of this image. Now, if we wanted to work specifically on this building, this would be great for that. This will select the area, and anything that we change about the image will only be in this area. We mentioned the Crop tool before. We fitted it to our canvas, but if you'd like to change your image further, you can always do that with the Crop tool. And if you make a mistake, remember Control-Z. The Frame tool can create fake frames for the image, so you can test how a crop would look before you do that. So, like as you can see, I just dragged a little box. This gives us a little fake frame. Eyedropper tool will give us the local color of a selection. So I click here, and you can see on the left in this little color palette, it's selected the color of the building. I can also do this with the sky, which will give us a blue. I can do this with the cloud, which will give us a white. This is a lot more useful for digital art, but for photo manipulation, this is also important. Here's where we start getting into our Photoshop tools, the ones that Photoshop's known for. This is the spot healing brush tool. And to work with these, I'm going to pull us over to the layers real quick. Layers allow us to make separate images. Oh, the select only, sorry, I should have looked at the chat. So, if you're in Photoshop, just make sure that in this side option, that you've selected the object selection tool. Now, I'm using Photoshop 2022. I'm not too familiar with different versions of Photoshop. I don't know if this is a newer tool or if this has been around for a long time. But if you run into something called the object selection tool, to use it, all you really have to do is just click. All right. I hope that answered your question. I'm sorry if it didn't. Is it an option under another tool? Not that I know of. Whenever I first selected it, it is in this default position on the canvas. You might be seeing either the quick selection tool or the magic wand tool instead. So if you see any images that look like this, that might be where your object selecting tool is. If that's not it, you might want to Google your version of Photoshop and see if you have that tool. But yeah, that's about all I know. Sorry about that. So with I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the spot healing brush tool. So this is like one of the staples of Photoshop. This can select areas. I'm gonna click and drag, and it takes a surrounding color. So as you can see the color of the sky, it'll replace that. So you can see that that cloud that was there before, I take the spot healing brush tool, I cover that up, and it almost completely eliminates the cloud. So this is very useful for portraits, if there's blemishes on the face, if there's just a tree in the background that you really need to get rid of because it's sticking out of somebody's head. This is great for just changing your photo around and making it look better. So underneath this tool, we have a couple different versions of it. There's the normal healing brush tool, which you can manually select a surrounding area and you can replace. There's some patching tools. There's content aware move tools. I'm just gonna stick to the basic default ones for now. Moving on to the brush tool. This you won't really see too often in photo manipulation. This is more your art tools. But you can draw lines using the color that you've selected on the side of the canvas. We have the cloning stamp, which is another classic tool. You need to alt-click to define an area to clone. So let's say I want to clone the white area of this cloud. So I'm going to alt-click, and then I'm going to drag. You can see that if you look towards the cloud, there's a little plus. That's where I'm taking the selection from. So as you can see, I move into this blue area of the sky, and it's grabbing from there. This is a useful tool if you want to kind of extend a background. Maybe you have a pretty sunset, but it kind of ends in an awkward spot. You can drag that forward a little bit, kind of move that along. The history brush tool, and I'll actually use this as an example. I'm going to take my cloning brush or my spot healing, and I'm going to get rid of this cloud. And then let's say I've been working on this image for a while it's kind of too late to just Control Z that cloud back. So where this brush comes in, the history brush tool, it will restore the historical size. However, it's giving me an error because the canvas isn't the exact thing. So that will let us go back if we're too far, but we're not too far. So I'm going to go ahead and Control Z that. This is the eraser tool. This will erase entire parts of the image. It doesn't add anything to the background though, so this is once again more of a digital art thing, because if you're using an image and you kind of just completely erase a part, it's just going to show the canvas in the background. Gradient tools add blends of color in a drag direction. I'm going to click in the center of this image and I'm going to drag and then release. You can see that this is just a pure white gradient, so it won't do much, but this is a more advanced technique. You can create a layer on top and you can blend it and it will kind of give the photo a color gradient. Blur tool, it's in the name, blurs things. Usually you'd want a higher brush size depending on what you're working with. So like if you want to blur the edges of a photo, you can do that. The dodge tool adds lighting areas to an image. It adds artificial lighting, so you can see, let's say this top part is a little bit dark. Let's add some light to it. We can color dodge, and this will lighten up the area of the image. It's very useful for, once again, I always like to mention portraits, but a lot of these editing tools can really make your portrait stand out. This is a pen. It's like the brush, except it's a lot more defined. You can add all these lines and then work on top of it with your brush. This is when we start getting into more digital art tools like the text box, which you won't see too often in image manipulation, but you can always add this text box and type text. I'm actually gonna go ahead and move on from the tools. Remember that if you have questions about the tools, you can always check the quick tutorials, and there's also in-depth tutorials underneath the Learn More tab. I'm going to get rid of this text layer, and down here you can see that this plus image, this will create a new layer for us to work on. Usually you want to create layers. Oh, the version you have doesn't have tutorials. Oh man. Definitely Google is your best resource then. Photoshop, as I mentioned before, has been around for such a long time that you're going to find so many in-depth tutorials about specific tools. And I really do want to recommend that if you want to get super specialized into Photoshop, to use your Google skills and find tutorials on specific things that you want. So that's definitely one of your best tools. But whenever you want to manipulate a photo, you'll see this side tab, something called adjustments. I believe, I'm sorry, you're not asking me that. In our adjustments tab, this is where we'll find our main photo manipulation tools. They're a little small and they're not very intuitive when you first look at them, but you'll be able to see that we have all these different options. Now, a lot of these are very specialized. I'll throw this one out there. If you really want to get into the deep nitty-gritty of photo manipulation, we have a photo class here at Catawba College, photography. One of the parts of this course is we learn how to use Photoshop. I recommend that course if you're really interested in Photoshop and digital photo editing. But we'll go over the basics here today. So brightness and contrast, when you click on that, you have your, as I mentioned, brightness and contrast. Brightness brings up the color of the image, and contrast increases the color differentiation between items. So you can see that that makes it a lot more dramatic. With a lot of photo editing, constraint is key. As you can see, I can just bump up this brightness forever. That doesn't look great. So a lot of the skill in using Photoshop for photo manipulation is discovering the right amount of balance, which can be difficult. I'm going to go ahead and clear this layer. Whenever you create an adjustment, it'll create a new layer that has the adjustment on it. And I'll show this real quick. Let me bump this brightness up. So yeah, that doesn't look great. But if we go down to our layers, you'll see a little eyeball. And this you can click on, and it'll get rid of that layer for viewing the image. So if I'm in the middle of adjusting a photo, I'm like, man, I really don't know if this layer looks good. You can always turn that off, and you can view it before and after, just very quick and easy. So we don't really need brightness editing for this photo. I'm going to go ahead and right click, and there'll be delete layer within here. And that'll get rid of our brightness and contrast. We go back to our adjustments layer on the side, and here you have levels. Levels have a lot to do with color. Now, digitally, color functions in RGB, red, green, and blue. If you're an artist or any sort of photo person, you'll know that red, green, and blue are very essential to the color of a photo in art. So this levels looks a little complicated, but we can see that we can grab this and we can manipulate the levels of the photo color-wise. So on the left end is your dark colors, on the right end is your light colors, and you can adjust the histogram for the desired color combination that you want. Our next photo manipulation tool is the curves. This is like our previous levels adjustment, but we can create a curve to emphasize contrast or pull down certain colors while we pull up certain colors. So when you click on this little histogram, you'll see a dot appear on this. And that nice normal line that was straight before is now a little curved. We can move this dot down, up, and to the side. And this will change our color values and our brightness and darkness. Now, just as like a quick little photo editing technique, when you first pull this up, you can create a tiny S-curve by bumping the x-axis and the y-axis. You can see on the side here, the complete brightness of it, I believe, is the y-axis, and the x-axis is also the same. So it has the dark to light. So this end is where your lights are, this end is where the darks are. So if you want like quick contrast boost, you can bring this up, you can go to this histogram, you can bring the whites up a little bit, bring the darks down a little bit. This is just a quick contrast editing technique. This is something that I learned in the photography class that I took on campus. So once again, I recommend that. And just to show you the differentials, I'll turn this layer on and off. You can see that just this little technique just adds a little bit of character to the image. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this layer again. Head back to adjustments. Exposure. This is honestly after brightness, contrast, and levels and curves. This is when we start getting into really kind of advanced photo editing. This is where like taking a class will be useful. But exposure, if you've ever done photography before, you know is the amount of light that's being let into the lens. So you can manually set the exposure of the image here. Let's say that you're doing photography, you kind of mess up the exposure a little bit, it's too bright. You can head here in Photoshop, bring your exposure down, level that out. Let's see, vibrance is a little advanced. Hue and saturation. Once again, kind of some more advanced terms. But hue lets us choose what color family that this image is going to go towards. So let's say that I want it to be more red for some reason. I'll move this way. And as you can see, the hue is changing. The colors are starting to look really weird. This is just like, you'll often only see small bumps of hue in photo editing. Now, if you want to get really crazy with your photo editing, I mean, this is where you go. You can just do like these weird colors. So it's definitely something interesting to explore. Saturation is the strength of the color. So if a color is just kind of like washed out and dull, you can bump the saturation here. So you can see that the image starts getting a lot more colorful. Too much. And then if you had something that's just completely overtaking your image, you can always bump the saturation down. Lightness, once again, there's lots of options for this sort of thing for lightness. And color balance. Color balance is another fun tool. This is a little more specialized than your hue and saturation. This is where you can get specific colors really popping through. So the red of this brick, I'll bump that up. So we'll go over here to the midtones. There's a couple options here. You can bump the shadow values, you can bump the midtone values, and you can bump the highlights. Midtones are going to be what's more common, so I'll just use that. If it lets me select. There we go. All right, so I'm going to bump the reds up, just as an example, and you can see that this image just immediately gets extremely red. This is when you really start playing between your colors. I can bump the red, I can bump the green, you can do all these different colors on the side, and you'll really be able to get what you want out of the image. This is the hurdle of Photoshop, is that there's so much stuff within these menus that it's very intimidating for a first-time user. This intro is kind of just showing that you can play around on these images. You can find what you want to do, and whenever you kind of work with it, you'll start to realize what you like. You'll start to figure out certain like styles and techniques that you want to use, and then soon enough you'll be knowing this like it's the back of your hand. But really, I just wanted to do this intro just to show that like anybody can really boot up a photo editing software and play around and figure out what you want to do. One of the favorites of people, the photo filter. You can see all these different photo filter options. We have like a warming filter, cooling filter, and all that sort of thing. Or you can choose a specific color that you want to filter. And let me... Yeah, we have inversion, if you ever want to do that. I mean, a lot of this is, as I mentioned before, a lot of this is when it starts getting super advanced. So you can actually use inversion to kind of make an image pop more, but you have to do a whole bunch of layer settings and kind of blend it in with it, and that's a very advanced technique. And gradient maps are another fun thing. So you can see I click this gradient map, and I have it set on black and white right now. So the entire image is black and white. But within this gradient map menu, you can see all these different options for different colors. So I'll bring up into the basics, open this folder up. Those look pretty more basic than I thought they'd be. So I'll head into the blues. You can see all these different options, and these are different gradients and intensities. So I'll choose this one. And you can see that that's kind of just completely blued out my image. But if I go down here and I find that image, I can change the opacity of this layer. And that'll make it less intense. So if you want a little bit of background gradient, and this is another thing where you can find specific gradients online, you can always download user-made ones that you really want. You can change this opacity. You can add a little hint of whatever color you want, and this will map the image, kind of just give us a little bit of character. And I believe that's it for the Adjustments tab. These are your basics for photo editing. You'll work in these every time you work with it. It'll give you a new layer. You can turn these layers on and off. And if you're working on a copy of your image, there's no risk. You can do whatever you want with it. It's not going to permanently screw up your image unless you're working on the image itself and then you save over it. So this is a tool that you can use to play around and discover what you like to do with photos. Whenever you're done, you'll want to export the image. You go up here to File, and you'll see an export option. There's a quick export. This will just give you the PNG image. And you can always export as a specific file. This will save to your Photoshop. You can change the scale of your image. Like, let's say I really only want this to be maybe 50% of the size. I can bump that down to 50. It'll be a smaller file size. This is especially useful for web design because whenever you're sending images over the internet on a website, you really don't want a big image. So when using a smaller image, that'll make your websites load faster and all that sort of thing. That's more web design than photo editing. And we can add, for like professional photographers, you can add your copyright and contact info into the metadata of the image itself. Metadata is kind of background data. So if you download this image and you pull it up in like a photo editor, you can see metadata. So if you like pull somebody's copyrighted image, your signature will be on there and everybody will know it's yours. So I'm going to go ahead and export this. This will bring you to your files. You can put it wherever you want. I really recommend having a organized like file system, like completed images, images in progress, that sort of thing. But for this purpose, I'm just gonna save this as Catawba edited to my downloads folder, and I'll save that. And I'll open this real quick. And, oh man, Windows is fun, isn't it? Anyway, that's how you export. Really, for most people's purposes, I really recommend the quick export as PNG. This is just going to give you your quick, like, image. Yeah, the VOD's going to be on this Twitch channel. So if you ever, like, really need a refresher or you miss something, you can always go back, check the VOD, and it should be there. Oh, we have a YouTube channel too, cool. So, as I mentioned before, I'm just gonna do some quick wrap up here. Photoshop, I know it's not available for everybody, kind of hard to get a handle of. On campus, you're gonna have a lot easier time. In person, might be a little rough. But we have at the Digital Lab, we have these laptops that you can check out. They'll have the current Photoshop version I'm using on here. So with all the fun tutorials, all the new tools and all that, good old Photoshop 2022. So you can go check this out and you can take your time to edit your images on your own time. We also have cameras available for checkout. So if you just want to, do a fun little photography expedition and then come and edit your images, that can all be done in Digital Learning Lab. To access that, you'll want to look up Catawba Digital Learning Lab. You'll see this website. This is our fun Catawba website for our Digital Learning Lab. Come check us out sometime. We have all these different tools, tutorials. We have trainings and workshops. You can see here that there's a little calendar where you can sign up for trainings. We have VR headset training tomorrow. I'll plug that. So over here's your meat and potatoes, the media checkout tab. You can see what we have available to check out. It'll show you if it's currently available or if it's been checked out. We have cameras, GoPro, Instant 360. We have podcasting kits, headsets, all that sort of thing. So here's the gaming laptop that I mentioned before. Has the entire Adobe suite loaded on it. You can edit your photos on here. Once again, this is what I streamed on. So that's available for all students. You just have to set a checkout. Show up to the Digital Learning Lab. We'll hook you up. That's about it for the stream. I appreciate you guys coming out. Sorry for the roughness first time streaming, but I hope to have some more tutorials for you guys eventually. That's about it. As always, I'll leave this open for some questions. If anybody has specific ones, I'll try to help you out. And if you're interested in getting very in-depth with Photoshop, I definitely recommend browsing around YouTube. There's so many good tutorials. This has been a system that's been out for years upon years. So you'll find wonderful in-depth tutorials on YouTube. Well, it doesn't look like there's any more questions. Once again, I appreciate you guys coming out. We'll definitely have more trainings available at the Digital Learning Lab in the future, and you can always come in person and have one of our work study students help you out. Thanks.